Trent Dawson had always ruled Summit Ridge High, his influence stretching across hallways like an unspoken law. But the day he decided to mess with Jasmine Whitfield was the day everything changed. No one saw it coming, least of all him. It all started with a look. Not just a passing glance, but the kind that lingered. The kind that made it clear someone didn't belong. And for Jasmine, that feeling was nothing new. She had only been in Summit Ridge, Idaho for 3 weeks, but it didn't take long to understand she was an outsider. Her father's job had them moving frequently, and she had long since learned that some towns were welcoming, while others made sure you knew you weren't one of them. Summit Ridge was the latter. She walked the halls with her backpack slung over one shoulder, avoiding the stairs, knowing full well what her father had warned her about. Boys like Trent Dawson, the ones who thought they owned the school, the town, and everyone in it. For 2 days she had hoped to go unnoticed. On the 3rd day, Trent made sure that wouldn't happen. It started with whispers when she passed by, followed by barely concealed laughter from his group of friends. Then came the jokes. About her hair, her voice, the way she walked. She ignored them, having learned that was the safest thing to do. But Trent Dawson wasn't the type to be ignored. During English class, as Mr. Holloway droned on about the Great Gatsby, a sharp whisper cut through the air. "Hey, new girl." Jasmine didn't look up. "I'm talking to you, Whitfield." She tightened her grip on her pen, pretending not to hear. Trent smirked, leaning back in his chair. "I just think it's funny, you know how some people show up where they're not wanted." A few snickers spread through the room. Jasmine focused on her notebook, determined not to react. "But hey," Trent continued, voice dripping with fake sympathy. "Maybe you're just lost. I mean, a school like this with people like us must feel kind of different, huh?" Her chest tightened, but she remained silent. "Hey, Whitfield, you hear me? Or is it hard to hear over all that—" "Trent!" Mr. Holloway's voice cut through the air, sharp and impatient. "Do you have something to share with the class?" Trent leaned back, raising his hands in mock innocence. "No, sir, just welcoming the new student." Mr. Holloway shot him a warning look before turning back to the board. Jasmine exhaled quietly, hoping that was the end of it, but when a crumpled piece of paper landed on her desk, she knew it wasn't. She hesitated before unfolding it. "Go back to where you came from." Her stomach dropped, but she refused to react. She tucked the note into her backpack, keeping her face blank. She had seen this kind of thing before, and she knew one thing for certain. Bullies didn't stop when you ignored them, they only pushed harder. The cafeteria was loud that Friday, the air thick with the scent of stale fries and greasy pizza. Jasmine sat alone, earbuds in, pretending she couldn't hear the whispers around her. Then she felt it, that presence. She looked up to find Trent standing a few feet away, hands stuffed in his Letterman jacket, smirking. Behind him, his friends Liam, Kyle, and Chase watched, waiting. "You always eat alone?" Trent asked. Jasmine didn't answer. "You should really try to make some friends." He glanced at her tray, then back at his friends. "Or maybe people just don't want to sit with you." Kyle snickered. Liam leaned in. "I think she likes being a loner." Trent stepped closer. "Or maybe she just doesn't belong here." Jasmine's fingers curled under the table, but she remained still. Trent didn't like that. In one swift motion, he grabbed her tray and flipped it. The cafeteria went silent as food splattered across the floor, mashed potatoes smearing across her sneakers, milk pooling at her feet. A few gasps, followed by barely restrained laughter. Jasmine stared at the mess, heat creeping up her neck. She knew they were all waiting to see if she would cry, if she would lash out, but she did neither. Instead, she calmly pushed her chair back, wiped her hands with a napkin, and stood up. Trent's smirk widened. "Where are you going? We're just getting to know each other." Jasmine took a slow breath. "Move." The cafeteria held its breath. Trent's smirk flickered. "What was that? I said move." His friends laughed. "Ooh," Liam chuckled. "She's got a mouth?" Trent stepped closer, closing the space between them. "Or what?" Jasmine swallowed, feeling her pulse hammer in her ears. Then, "What the hell is going on here?" The sharp voice cut through the tension. Miss Reese, the assistant principal, strode toward them, her heels clicking against the tile. Her gaze flicked between Jasmine and Trent before settling on the spilled food. Trent's smirk vanished. He took a step back, feigning innocence. Nothing, Miss Reese, just a little accident. She wasn't convinced. Is that true? She asked Jasmine. Jasmine hesitated. If she told the truth, nothing would change. No one ever stood up to kids like Trent. No one ever believed people like her. So she swallowed the lump in her throat and nodded. Yeah, it was an accident. Ms. Reese exhaled. Clean it up. And just like that, it was over. As Trent and his friends walked away, he threw one last glance over his shoulder. See you Monday, Whitfield. Jasmine stood there, staring at the mess. Her father had always told her to stand up for herself, but what was the point when no one listened? That night, the house was quiet when she got home, too quiet. Her father's voice drifted from the kitchen. Jasmine? She hesitated before answering. Yeah, it's me. She found him leaning against the counter, still in uniform, a fresh cup of coffee in hand. Elliot Whitfield wasn't the kind of man who missed details. Years in law enforcement had made him sharp. How was school, he asked. Jasmine hesitated. Fine. He took a slow sip of coffee. Try again, she sighed. Some kid dumped my lunch on me today. His eyes darkened. Who? She hesitated. It doesn't matter. It does, she sighed. Trent Dawson. Recognition flickered across his face. You know him? She asked. His jaw tightened. I know his family. Jasmine scoffed. Of course you do. Elliot frowned. And the school, what did they do? Nothing. His eyes sharpened. Nothing? She shook her head. If I told the truth, nothing would have happened. His dad probably owns half the school. Her father set his coffee down. And what message does that send? She blinked. What? When someone does something wrong and we let it slide, what message does that send? Jasmine didn't have an answer, but she knew one thing for sure. This time, she wasn't just going to let it slide. Jasmine clenched her jaw, looking away, not wanting to make a scene. But letting things like this go? That's how people like Trent Dawson kept getting away with it. Her fingers tightened into fists and frustration simmered beneath the surface. I don't want to make it worse, she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. Elliot Whitfield, her father, remained silent for a long time before finally stepping forward, resting a reassuring hand on her shoulder. You don't have to fight this alone, he said, softly. Jasmine swallowed the lump in her throat. She wanted to believe him, but she wasn't sure things could change. What she didn't know was that her father wasn't just going to let this slide, and tomorrow, Trent Dawson was going to learn exactly who he had messed with. Monday morning felt different. Jasmine could tell the second she stepped out of her dad's car. There was a shift in the air, a ripple of whispers down the hallways. People were looking at her, not with sneers or smirks, but with something else. Curiosity. Unease. Something had changed. She barely made it to her locker before she got her answer. Dude, the police chief is here. Jasmine's stomach dropped. She turned toward the main office and sure enough, there he was. Chief Elliot Whitfield stood tall in his uniform, his police badge gleaming under the fluorescent lights. His presence commanded attention, even from the teachers. Oh my God, she muttered under her breath. Before she could even process what was happening, the office door swung open. Chief Whitfield, I really don't see why this had to be taken so far. Jasmine froze. The voice belonged to Principal Warren, a middle-aged man with a thinning hairline and a forced smile. Behind him stood Ms. Reese and Trent Dawson's parents. Jasmine's breath hitched. Darren and Lauren Dawson looked exactly how she expected. Darren, a tall, broad-shouldered man in an expensive suit, had the look of someone who wasn't used to being questioned. Lauren, dressed in a beige cashmere sweater, clutched her designer purse like it was a shield. And then there was Trent. He stood beside them, his usual smirk replaced with something else, confusion. Like he didn't quite understand how things had escalated to this point. Chief Whitfield didn't look at him. His gaze was locked on Principal Warren. I took it this far, Elliot said, his voice calm but firm, because my daughter was publicly humiliated in your cafeteria, and your staff let it happen. Ms. Reese cleared her throat. With all due respect, Chief, No excuses. Elliot cut her off, his voice like steel. You saw what happened, and you let her take the blame for it. Darren Dawson let out a short laugh, shaking his head. Chief, come on. They're kids. It was just a misunderstanding. Elliot finally turned to him. A misunderstanding? His voice didn't rise, but somehow it felt sharper, more dangerous. Your son targeted my daughter, bullied her, humiliated her in front of the entire school. Lauren sighed dramatically. Chief Whitfield, do you know how many times we get calls from the school over silly little things like this? Boys will be boys. Jasmine clenched her fists. Elliot didn't even blink. That's the problem, he said. People like you raise boys like him, and then you wonder why they grow up thinking they can get away with anything. Trent shifted uncomfortably. For the first time he looked small. Principal Warren forced another smile. Let's not escalate this. Maybe we can come to an agreement. No, Elliot said simply. There's no agreement. There's accountability. A tense silence filled the office. Jasmine swallowed. She had never seen her father like this, not just as her dad, but as Chief Whitfield. Lauren glanced at her son, then sighed dramatically. Trent apologized. Trent's jaw clenched. Mom, now... Trent let out a slow breath, turning to Jasmine. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced with something else. Humiliation. Sorry, he muttered. Elliot raised an eyebrow. Louder? Trent's ears burned red. He gritted his teeth. I'm sorry, he said, barely looking at her. Jasmine knew it wasn't genuine. She knew it didn't mean anything, but for once he wasn't the one in control. Elliot turned back to Principal Warren. This isn't over. I want a full report filed, and if this school has any history of letting things like this slide, trust me, I'll find it. Darren Dawson's face hardened. You don't want to make an enemy out of the wrong people, Chief. Elliot turned to him, eyes steady. Neither do you. And with that he walked out. But this was only the beginning. By lunch, the whole school was talking about what had happened in the office. Whispers followed Jasmine down the hallways. Some kids avoided looking at her, others stared. A few even gave her something she hadn't expected, nods of quiet approval. Trent, on the other hand, wasn't taking it well. She saw it in the way he stormed into the cafeteria, jaw tight, hands clenched into fists. His usual confidence had been replaced with something uglier. Anger, humiliation, frustration. When she walked past him to grab a tray, he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Guess Daddy had to fight your battles for you, huh? Jasmine froze. The cafeteria noise faded into the background. She turned slowly, meeting his glare. What did you just say? Trent took a step closer, a mocking sneer curling at his lips. You heard me. His voice was low, sharp. You think this makes you special? That people actually care about you? The second your dad gets transferred or fired or whatever, you're back to being nothing. Jasmine's pulse pounded. But this time she wasn't just going to walk away. She squared her shoulders, lifted her chin. You're mad. Trent blinked, caught off guard. What? She tilted her head. You thought you'd get away with it, just like always, but for once someone actually put you in your place. His sneer faltered. That's why you're mad, she continued, because you know that no matter what you say, no matter how much you try to act tough, everyone saw what happened today. She leaned in just slightly. And now? They don't respect you. They pity you. Trent's face turned red. Shut up, she smiled. Make me. For the first time, he was the one backing down. He clenched his jaw, fists shaking at his sides. But he didn't say another word. Instead, he turned and stormed out of the cafeteria, pushing past his friends. Jasmine exhaled, adrenaline still pumping through her veins. She could feel the eyes on her, but for the first time since she moved here, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel like the outsider. She felt seen, and as she picked up her tray and walked to her table, she realized something else. Trent Dawson might have thought he ruled this school. But that was over now, and he knew it.